It's our weekly politics episode. We're talking about data centers in Pennsylvania. As more and more data centers pop up across the state with promises of new jobs, there's also growing concern about the impact that they have. The Shapiro administration estimates the loss of billions of dollars in state revenue because of a tax exemption for these companies on things like computer servers and data storage equipment, which are used by the centers to run. And then there's the ways that data centers impact our energy bills, water resources, and air. Kate Huangpu, government reporter for Spotlight PA, joins me to break this all down. It's Wednesday, February 25th. I'm Trenae Nuri, and we're talking politics. We got to start at the beginning because, Kate, I'm going to be honest with you. When I hear the word or the term data center, I'm like, what in the world is this? I know it's new technology. I know people are concerned about it, but what even is a data center?
Yeah, I think when we're talking about data centers now, we're mostly referring to, large warehouses or campuses that house these, computer servers, like data storage servers that basically are used to help process all this new information that's coming in, like the amount of energy that's needed for all like AI, generative AI kind of stuff. We just need more and more service to like save all that information and house all that data. And that's really what we're talking about these days.
How is the AI boom fueling all of this?
Because of people using more and more AI, especially generative AI models like ChatGPT, that requires a lot of energy. Basically, the way that this is a roundabout definition, but the way that you train these models is that you give them a bunch of information and then they take all that information and do some tech stuff with it and then shoot out an answer for you. But all of that layers of processing needs like data storage. It needs, it's a lot of energy that's being used. Mm-hmm. And so because of the rise of these companies and how popular they are now, that just increases the demand for like energy and storage, data services, sort of things like that.
Okay. Thank you for that. Great, just kind of breakdown. Yes, I totally get it. I think a lot of us, even if we may not think that we're using AI is pretty much all around us. But why are these companies targeting Pennsylvania? What's attracting them to the Keystone State?
Yeah, well, in Pennsylvania, there's a few things. One is that we're a huge energy producer. We're the biggest energy producer in the Northeast. And these data centers need a lot of energy to keep servers cool, to just keep the facility running. We also have a big union construction base. There's a lot of construction that's needed with setting up these big warehouses. There's also a need for like streams of water to help cool the servers as well. And we have a few big rivers. So those are the big factors that I think are drawing people to Pennsylvania right now.
Is part of the reason too because of this tax exemption for these companies?
I think that is the question. A lot of the data center developers are saying, we need these tax exemptions. That's a big reason that we're coming to Pennsylvania. I think about 37 other states have similar sort of tax exemptions right now. But for some researchers, some advocates, they say it's not that big of a deal. It's not actually that much money when you're talking about billion-dollar companies. So it really depends on who you're asking.
But it seems like, though, like you just said, these data centers could possibly strain other ecosystems that we have.
Yeah, definitely. You can see across Pennsylvania right now, the first step is for these data centers to get zoning approval, essentially to start building. And a lot of local residents are saying, we don't want you here, whether it's because of energy demand, water demand, noise pollution, or even things just like it's really pretty out here in rural Pennsylvania and we don't want a giant data center here mucking that up. And so it runs the gamut. But yeah, I would say when you're looking at popular sentiment for Pennsylvania residents, they definitely have concerns about data centers being in their backyards.
I totally understand that argument, Pennsylvania is beautiful and folks want to protect that and keep that sacred. On the other hand, though, is this booming industry um, offering new jobs, offering a new kind of like a reawakening to communities that could benefit from some economic stimulation right now?
Yeah, I mean, that is what the developers say. They say that they'll create thousands of construction jobs. They'll create, a couple hundred maintenance jobs, like long-term jobs.
Have they?
That's sort of up for debate. We're in the early stages now, and if you look at different studies, they'll say different things about what kind of jobs those are. Are they, sort of high-paying, like engineering level jobs, or are they more like low-wage jobs, like groundskeepers and sort of things like that? And so it's a real cost-benefit analysis on a county by county, like place by place basis of, is this the kind of economic development you want to bring to your township?
Are there companies that are thinking of like maybe how they could be better stewards of the local environments that they're placed in? Those kind of conversations have to be happening, right?
Yeah, I think that part of the reason that it's hard to know is that a lot of these processes take place behind the scenes.
Mm.
Sometimes there are community benefits agreements with developers and the township that sort of outline, um, if a developer says, I'm going to come to this town, I will put forth X or Y amount of money to parks or local education, libraries, sort of things like that. But there are attempts in the legislature to sort of increase transparency or put higher requirements or regulations on data centers that come to Pennsylvania. So whether that be reporting the amount of energy they're using or making sure that if they do come here, they have to contract it to bring their own energy so they're not going to influence like utility prices for consumers. Um, None of those are law right now. So we're kind of in the wild, wild west where there's a lot of ground to cover.
Let's say we eliminate this tax exemption. How does that affect Pennsylvania's competitiveness compared to some of our neighboring states? And this question kind of reminds me of how our neighbors, maybe in Jersey or in other states, have legalized cannabis, which has meant we're losing revenue here in Pennsylvania because that has been a conversation in Harrisburg that it seems like we still can't get a consensus on.
Yeah, I mean, they're kind of inverse things, right? Where in the case of cannabis, we're losing tax revenue we could be having um, because we haven't legalized. In the case of this sales tax exemption, because it exists, we're losing revenue. So basically, the sales and use tax exemption for data centers means that they don't have to pay sales tax on things like computer servers or like data storage equipment. And so that's estimated to lose about $2 billion dollars by 2031. It was first uncapped in, I believe, 2021. To my knowledge, there's no movement within the legislature to undo that. There's one bill, but when I talked to the maker of the bill, he said he's not hopeful that it's going to go very far, or he's not sure. Um, Whereas the cannabis side, that's something where um, there's a lot of support for it, popular support, even amongst lawmakers, but there's not really a consensus as to how we can get it done.
Tell me a little bit about who in Harrisburg is trying to repeal these tax exemptions.
Yeah, it's State Rep Greg Vitale. He's a Democrat from Delaware County, and he introduced a bill, I believe, 2 weeks ago now, that would just repeal this sales and use tax exemption for data centers. He introduced the bill as sort of a flagpole. I will see if it actually goes anywhere. I'm not particularly confident.
Do you think it's because it's maybe harder to repeal something that's kind of met with this like booming industry?
I think it's more the sentiment in the legislature right now is pretty pro data center, um,
Right.
or
Governor
at
Josh
least
Shapiro's pro data centers.
definitely, yeah. Shapiro has definitely thrown his support behind data centers. I think it's also like even the folks who maybe are more reticent or not as big of fans, they're kind of accepting the fact that they're going to be here. They're coming. They're here already, or at least the
Right.
beginning stages are. And so I think there's a real sentiment of like, harm reduction rather than trying to create. Well, so there's a lawmaker in the Senate, Katie Muth, who introduced a bill to have a moratorium on data center development. So I think it's for 3 years. It would say that no data centers are allowed to develop here. We need some time to sort of let townships figure out how they want to address this, what they want to prioritize, put in legislation that would make sure that once the data centers are here, they won't really increase energy demand.
And also, I feel like it will give some time to kind of like maybe study this a little bit deeper to see some of those long-term effects.
Yeah, definitely. That's what her position is, but I think she's in a similar position to Vitali, where I don't know if the legislature is in a place where they would want to pause this altogether. Most folks, I would say, are more in a place of it's going to happen. Let's try to sort of see if we can make this less impactful towards consumers.
So, if this tax exemption doesn't get repealed, do you think this bill could be tweaked or shifted to address some of the data center specific concerns that we've been talking about?
Yeah, I think that is the question. When I talked to the maker of the bill, I think he said he was open to that. Um, and there's always a chance that it could be looped into any of the other existing bills on data centers right now. But it's sort of hard to say. I will say there's a lot of focus on data centers in the legislature right now. I was not expecting it, frankly, going into this new year.
Hmm.
But Shapiro really talked about it a lot in his budget address. There have been a few hearings in the legislature about it. There's a whole host of bills. That doesn't guarantee that something's going to happen, but it's usually a helpful first step when lawmakers are all at least focused on one issue. And so that's the first hurdle to clear, I think.
You said earlier this is like county by county. What's going on in Philadelphia? Do you think Philly could be building more data centers? And where would they put a data center in Philly?
I think that is the question. I mean, I know there's one proposed in Chester County. There's a few up the river. I think there's actually one in Northeast Pennsylvania in Berwick. Um, and so the main thing is that you do need a decent amount of space, which in Philly, we don't have too much of. It's not out of the question. But to my knowledge, there aren't that many data centers proposed in Philadelphia County. There's some in Chester County. I think there's one in Bucks, and then most of them are in up the river in like Schuylkill County area, Northeast Pennsylvania.
All right, we've got more on this data center conversation after the break. Okay, Kate, I look at my gas bill, my electric bill, my water bill, and they are increasing. Does any of this conversation about data centers play into why I keep paying more? Are taxpayers left with this energy burden? Does it affect all of my bills?
Uh, the short answer is yes, most likely. There's going to be an increase in energy demand. There already is. And because we're a part of a grid organization that expands to like Virginia and Maryland, other places that already have data centers, we are already sort of experiencing that demand. And we've seen that in price hikes over the past few years. It's not necessarily data center driven, but it's also driven by just the amount of technology and energy we've been using. That's been increasing over the past few years. And so right now, a lot of the concern is that as data center development increases, we're going to get to a point where it's untenable,
Mm.
because there's a cap on the amount that energy prices can rise right now. Shapiro sort of filed a lawsuit, negotiated with the grid organizer, the PJM, but that's not in perpetuity. So there's a lot of like scrambling to figure out, how are we going to produce more energy? How are we going to make sure that the energy demand that these data centers are asking for or will need isn't going to influence, like you and me.
So the governor negotiated this cap, but also in the budget address, he said he wants a new consumer protection program for energy rates. The latest version expired in 2024. Would this help with those big bills?
Yeah, I mean, there was a time that I believe it's chapter 14 you're talking about. it has to be renewed. It's been renewed before. I think the current climate in the legislature is that it's pretty hard to pass anything, especially given that we just came out of a budget impasse. But yeah, it would basically authorize the PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, to sort of help regulate those energy prices. And so that's one thing he wants to do. He's also talked about these sort of grid requirements, is what he called them, where any data centers that come to Pennsylvania would have to bring their own energy. It's unclear what the exact specs of that program would be. It's also unclear if like Shapiro has the authority to do that himself, or he would need the legislature, the PUC to help out. And so it's a lot of sort of question marks right now.
The governor also has a package of bills that relate to energy costs. He calls it the Lightning Plan, some of which could help get those utility bills down. Do you think there's any shot of this getting passed?
There's a few bills. So two of the big bills in the Lightning Plan, one would be a carbon cap and trade policy, which is sort of like this thing called the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative that Pennsylvania tried to join. We were stopped by a lawsuit we never fully participated in. It would basically cap the amount of carbon that companies in Pennsylvania are allowed to produce, and they'd make them pay for it. That probably isn't going to happen. We were stuck in a lawsuit for many years trying to figure out if that was legal, and Senate Republicans are pretty adamant that they will never pass anything like that through their chamber. So that seems pretty dead. The other major part of that is called the Alternative Energy Portfolio Standards. It basically mandates that any utility company that sells energy to the Public Utilities Commission buys a certain amount of renewable energy sources. So he wants to increase the amount of renewable energy that those utility companies buy. And so that's like solar, it's wind, it's natural gas that traps the carbon produced. The Senate Republican leader said he's more open to that. There's also various like permitting things, speeding up permitting for energy developers that Senate Republicans have also said they're open to. So it's unlikely that the Lightning Plan in its entirety would pass, but bits and pieces might make its way through the legislature.
Gotcha. Okay, Kate, there are so many other issues facing Pennsylvania right now. Should the state prioritize attracting these large tech companies, even if it means losing revenue? Because that money could be used towards schools and infrastructure and maybe SEPTA, like that we were talking about for so long last year, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, like, should the state be prioritizing this whole issue?
Yeah, I mean, as a journalist who has no opinions on political issues, I don't know if I can tell lawmakers what they should or should not be prioritizing. I will say that it's sort of a perennial issue every budget cycle that we talk about this thing called the structural deficit. We spend more money than we take in tax revenue or fees, sort of things like that. And so as a state that is perennially looking for more money, which I'm sure many states are, we're always losing about $2 billion in tax revenue is, that's no small fee, especially when we don't actually even know if it's exactly $2 billion. These data centers don't have to report how much they're spending. And in other states that have similar exemptions, like in Georgia, their estimates have been way off. Like they estimate a much smaller number than they actually lose in tax revenue. And so it's just one sort of small piece of the puzzle of how the state could be getting more money. It could also legalize cannabis.
Right.
It could also regulate skill games. And so it's a real, it's all one big puzzle of seeing how the pieces fit together.
Do you know if there are any ways to maybe add more requirements to improve transparency or accountability amongst these new data centers that are going to be popping up? Companies will get these exemptions, but who's keeping them in check? They can't just, wreak havoc on our environment without consequences, right?
Yeah, there's a bunch of bills in the House right now that are trying to do just that. So they would mandate data centers to report how much energy they use, how much water they use. There was a bill that was just voted through the Energy Committee that would give the PUC to the ability to basically create rules to regulate data centers, where they could mandate disclosure of certain parts of the processes. Also on a municipal level, like on a township level, sometimes when data centers are asking for zoning permission, they have to go through a public use hearing process. And in that process, municipalities have public hearings where they're able to ask data centers all these questions and deny the ability to zone based on those hearings. And so on like small pocket levels, there is some of that ability, but there are attempts in the legislature to make that, state law.
Kate, thank you so much for joining me today on CityCast Philly.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
That's all for today here on CityCast Philly. Let us know what you think about data centers in Pennsylvania. Also, share this episode with a friend. Rate the show, leave us a review, and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to sign up for our morning newsletter to learn more about what else Philly's talking about. And don't forget, you can support the show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Philly neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.